talk about some interesting stuff. So, in the past week, talking about followership. Um, so, what's your all's take on followership so far? Any insights so far, or questions, or not concerns, but things that you wonder why is it the way that that is, or things that stand out? And if you also have connection issues, please put them in the chat too.
I enjoyed the concept. I don't think I've ever really been taught or interacted much with the idea. But reading that first article, it was kind of just for something that seemed so simple on the surface, and then reading some more about it, I just appreciated it, and the fact that I think there are more followers than leaders, and I think that it's just a little more relatable to the common person than, say, someone that has to have the role of leadership, and the parallels and how they cross paths too.
Amira, I saw you come off mute if you had something to share too. Other insights or things that you all have found interesting so far, or disagreements too?
I actually just watched your video this morning, so it's fresh in my mind, but I really liked the way, well, I thought it was interesting. I read through the reading last night, and to tell myself, this is one of the few readings recently that I've actually read before the discussion. So it was kind of neat to be able to think about the different patterns, like in the readings and in your video. I like the part where it said that, you know, leaders or followers adjust like depending on the leader. So that was kind of neat, like, how when a leader is like absent or hands off, then like followers can interpret it in their own way, and like sometimes that's good and sometimes that's bad. So that was a neat perspective to kind of think about.
Which I think is a little kind of juxtaposed, I can't even speak this morning, juxtaposed against the whole, well, followers sometimes take on that more independent role and figure out some things for themselves when they have to, right? That whole, I'm going to shift my responsibility. I'm going to be flexible whenever possible. Other key insights before we dive into today's reading about followership?
I also like the fact, kind of like how Grace was talking about, people like kind of change based off of like the type of the leader, but I also like the fact that you put in there like the leader, like the dynamics in terms of like the leaders who are like the ones who are given the position versus they rise up as a leader, like the implied leaders, that type of thing. Like that also makes a huge difference too, because like you can have somebody who is like, oh, I was given this position as a leader, but like no one really wants to follow them. And like, I'm glad you mentioned that aspect of trust in there. I feel like the aspect of trust goes both ways, not just from a leader to like followers. I mean, like followers to leaders, but also leaders to followers. Like the element of trust is definitely important in there, because like you have to kind of trust the people around you. And I feel like when you build that trust with them, you also like help to change the followers into different types of followers as you like work with them. And like the followers themselves also can help develop the leader to be a better leader. So like you can have a leader who's like the leader's kind of like just meh, but like the followers are so amazing that they like bring all this information to the table. They're engaging, they're bringing information and having questions, and they're actually helping the leader to develop their leadership skills and make them a better leader. So like really great followers can actually make a better leader.
I like the part at the end of your video, Erica, about initiative. Like you talked a little bit about taking initiative and being able to volunteer, a follower volunteering their self to a position or to a task or something, or fixing things that needs done. I think that's like not something I would often consider followership. Like I would still think like, well, they're taking initiative, that's leadership. But I guess that initiative of itself doesn't necessarily mean it's leadership. Is that, because I wasn't really sure about that. I was like, well, that's a type of leadership. Like even if you're considered a follower, you're leading in that. So
and it can be a combo of both. I think in the reading for today, it can be a combo of both, in that a follower is empowered to take initiative. It may not necessarily be what you see as leadership, but if that person inspires, say, another person to follow them, then that does become leadership. It is very kind of, or can be very convoluted, but if a follower is empowered to take initiative, then it does build on that trust. Because if you don't feel you're trusted, you're not going to take that initiative, right? If I don't feel like I'm trusted as a follower, I feel like, hey, I'm going to get my hand slapped if I take the initiative. And regardless of whether that turns out to be good or bad, I could be punished in some way, is one way to look at it too. Other insights, or if you want to put them in the chat, please do. But I think you asked a good question, Grace, is initiative leadership, or does it become leadership? And Amar shares, when there is more trust, similar values and understanding, relationship become between leaders could be more effective. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think I even just got through a 3-day, what is a staff retreat for one of my clients. And the biggest value that came out of that was trust. Like staff have to be trusted to do their job. You think in terms of an employer, people hire you to do a job. They hire you for your expertise and your experience. And then you have to be trusted to do that job, not micromanaged. As soon as I think someone is micromanaged, they're no longer as effective as an employee because they're not trusted. Yes, and Amir, you're completely correct in terms of it being a power sharing. If you have a leader that is power hungry, or feels that they have to dominate the environment or the conversation, then that doesn't allow for followership, that doesn't allow for initiative, that doesn't allow for someone to take the reins when they're perfectly capable of doing the work. So I want to bring up the article that was for today and go through a couple of key points, and I want to ask you all a few questions to get your insights or to contribute to the conversation here. So one of the first things that strikes me in this chapter, and the book as a whole is really fantastic, The Art of Followership. I think I've shown you this one before too. If you have a chance to read all of it or get a copy of it, I'm sure you can also buy it online to read it, would not have to wait forever to get a hard copy, is very insightful. And Amir also shares that when followers trust the leader, believe in him, and listen to him, then he is leader. When no one listens to leader, no one could be a good leader. Absolutely. If you don't trust a leader, you don't listen to what they have to say, their credibility goes out the window to say, well, I'm going to ask you to do this because I'm the leader and I'm going to tell you to do this. And then it's kind of like, why should I have to listen to that or do what you ask when you haven't shown me any guidance, when I don't trust you, when I don't listen to you? Dealing with that with another organization where the person who is the hired leader, the person that is selected to run this organization, is in a way given no power and is put in between a rock and a hard place. And when they ask the board to become involved, there's a lot of conflict of interest between the board and the decisions that they have to make as a board. It's a very interesting, complex situation that I don't think I would wish for anybody to have to take on. Doesn't seem very fair. I mean, I know a lot of things in life are not fair, but in terms of somebody being hired to do a job and then it's like impossible for them to do their job, seems very difficult, and one situation that I would prefer not to be in. But one thing that really stands out to me with this chapter is that the first thing that people think of when they think of followers is that they lack a willingness or capability to assume a leadership role. So if you're not in a leadership role, you are not capable or willing to take on a leadership role. So I think most of us would disagree with that perspective, but maybe why would somebody have this perspective of followers? Why would somebody say, well, if you're not in a leadership role, it's because you're not capable or you're unwilling? Why would somebody have this perspective? If you're not a leader, it's because you lack willingness or capability to be a leader.
Do you mind to restate your question? I don't think I really understand what you're asking.
Sure. So when we read that sometimes leaders would think that, or just in general, the general public might think that if you are not a leader, whether that's designated, implied, if you're not a leader, it's because you lack the willingness or capability to assume a leadership role. Why would there be, say, that assumption or that belief? Why would somebody believe this?
I think we really idolize leadership. We have this buzzword where everyone's like, oh, I just noticed the other day that we even have our campers are kids, and we have these descriptions of all these, and I'm like, all these lists of things they're going to get to, explore and gain leadership skills, and it's like they're not really learning. I mean, not really. It's but it's things that you want people to. I don't know. I think in the world we have this idea that leaders are better, and you don't really give followers credit, and we don't think followership is almost like being a sheep or being led along if we don't look at the complexity of what it takes to follow. It doesn't just take blindly following. That's what I would say.
There are several people that I know that are not willing to take a leadership role because pretty much what Grace said is that they are held to this higher expectation and they don't want that type of responsibility. I can think of my mother, who is in a leadership role in her position for years and absolutely hated it. She hated managing people. She just wanted to do her job, and that was it. So yeah, Grace, I agree.
It all lands with me. Was someone else talking? I've already spoken, so if someone else was. I'll continue until I get. Feel free to interrupt me then. I was just going to agree with the two of you, and also at times it feels as though it comes from like a place of discomfort of like not meeting expectations of what a leadership is, or a leader is, and then therefore they think that they're not capable. I don't know. I think this falls into the conversation, but my brother's wife often gives me and my brothers a hard time for not making decisions when it comes to things like like going out to dinner, picking a restaurant or something. And I consciously choose not to do that because of her style of decision making and kind of taking that leadership on. And she takes it on very strongly. And if she doesn't get her way, then it's more of a conflict than her choosing. So I just choose to opt out of that. But from her perspective, it's
Avoidance.
yeah. And so I don't know, that example comes into my head of like just different ways to do different things, and that doesn't mean that you're not capable of it, but
When I think there's value too in assuming that people have a basic level of capability. And I think it sometimes is that choosing a battle, right? It's like, do I really want a leadership role in this circumstance? And sometimes the more, we were talking with our 8-year-old yesterday about this, about when she's like, yeah, I don't think I could be president. I'm like, and of course, our immediate reaction is, of course you can. Like anybody can choose to do whatever they want to do. And then she's like, yeah, but the people that really want to be the president probably shouldn't be. And the people that really don't want to are probably the best for that role. And I'm like, how old are you again? Like, okay. And she's like, but I wouldn't want to do that. I totally would not want to like take on that level. She didn't want what she was trying to say is that she didn't want the responsibility. And a lot of us wouldn't, right? Like, how many times have we looked at a leader and said, I wouldn't want that job? I look at the superintendent here, where we're trying to raise money to give to the district. Like, I don't want I would never want the superintendent's job. It's like an impossible role of trying to make sure that everybody is taken care of and that the community doesn't come at you complaining every bit of the way. Mainly because the school district has received like an F on its report card from the state for however long there's been a state report card, and they finally moved up to a D. And so that level of movement for the district as a whole, people are like, well, it's still a D. We're like, do you have any idea what it takes to move a district from an F to a D? That's major. And yet people still wanted to criticize and find fault in the leader. So it's a kind of one of those perfect examples, maybe not necessarily as follower, but it's easy to criticize a leader, right? It's easy to criticize that decision. Like, and this is still very much an American, I guess, perspective, but our governor in Ohio has decided to do $1 million lottery for people who've gotten vaccinated. And it was his push to be like, everybody get vaccinated. You might win $1 million, where everybody else is like, it is such a waste to give away. I think it's like, I forget how many millions of dollars total to incentivize people to get vaccinated. He has gotten so much flack for that. You should see the website. So easy to criticize, right? It's easy to criticize as opposed to saying, well, maybe there's at least a couple people that'll be like, yeah, I'd do that. I'd totally get vaccinated to possibly win $1 million. So that's like how many more people that would get vaccinated? Maybe not a very large number. I have no idea. But who knows? Maybe that's the different perspective we take. Is like, maybe it'll work for some people, maybe it won't, but it's easy to criticize. So one of the next pieces that I find very interesting. So I went through each one of the 3 perspectives So the interactive role, what that means. So if you haven't had a chance to peruse this, I've highlighted some key points here. It's an interactive role. You can't be in a vacuum. You can't be a follower in a vacuum, right? You have to have a leader that you're working with, really kind of by definition, right? And what I think we have come to believe, at least as we've explored this topic, is that the follower is equivalent to leadership in terms of importance. And I think Grace is very correct when we say we have put on this pedestal that leadership is what everybody should do. When we know really at our heart of hearts, like leadership is not for everybody. That may not be something that everybody wants to do, is suited to do. We think we had that one sentence of, well, followers are because they aren't capable of taking a leadership role. Maybe they're perfectly capable, if not the best option. And they're like, you know what, I'm not really digging it, so I'm not going to do it. So when we think of followers as important as leaders, so equals, but in different ways, their role is important. When we think about that, there are many things that describe or fit what a follower is supposed to do, or what they contain within them. So job knowledge and competence, building collaboration. So going back to the trust and the relationship that Amir mentioned, supporting the leader, right? So when we talk about not criticizing, we defend them also. We exert influence on that leader, like, so for example, bring to the table like, hey, I have this good idea, or maybe we should take this different direction, or, I really feel like we do have the capacity to do XYZ. Hey, leader, let's do this. That is influence, to guide them in decision making, show them what is feasible or possible by bringing an idea to them. Demonstrating proper comportment. So we act the way they would like us to act in public, or around other people, showing concern for them, and being supportive, willingness to participate in necessary organizational change. So all of these things are what we have come to expect out of followers, and what we want followers to do. So when we look at this list of 7 aspects, or 7 characteristics of what a follower is supposed to do, of these 7 things, are any of them, do you think, more important than others? Are there some that should be prioritized more than the others? I mean, all of them I think are important, but do you feel like, that, hey, this could be more important / something that we should focus on more than the others? Or maybe in your own circumstance are more important? So Grace, yes, they're all good traits that we expect from leaders and followers at the same time. From a follower perspective, maybe in your own organization or context, is one of these more important? Maybe the expectation of followers in your organization, maybe culturally, one of these is more important or necessary to get the work done.
First of all, I really I've never seen a list like this where it's showing what you should do as a follower rather than a leader, because most of the time we see dozens of lists of the qualities you should have as a leader instead of a follower. So I find this list very interesting. But what sticks out to me the most is that very last one, the willingness to participate in necessary organizational change. This is what the whole program is about, is change and adapting to change. So, we could talk about change all day long, but I find that interesting, because that is probably the number one issue I think leaders have an issue with when they're people are not mentally able to jump on board with such difficult changes sometimes.
I also like number 3, defending and supporting the leader in front of others. It kind of goes back to something you said last week in your video, where as a follower, you want to like defend in private and like praise in private or praise in public with a leader, but then like if you have problems, talk to them in private. So like give them compliments when everyone else is there, so that it kind of like builds up that team morale. Like, yeah, this person's doing great, but then if you have problems, go talk to them personally. Like, hey, I noticed this was an issue. Have you thought of this? And like give those, like have that dialogue with them in private rather than criticizing them out in the open.
Well, and I'm curious what our kind of collectivist culture members of the class think of number 5, the expectation that we are meeting the proper expectations, say like etiquette, the way we're supposed to act or what's appropriate, what's expected culturally. I'm kind of curious from a collectivist society perspective, if you feel like that there's that expectation, or I'm misreading how that might work in your context or your country or your culture.
I'm not a big fan of number 5.
No?
And if I think, for whatever reason, I think if we feel pressure of, around leadership, I think even more so this idea of professionalism and meeting the standard within the workplace, and that like the way you talk and the way that you dress is representative of who you are as a person in the workplace. I don't know. It just feels like such a boxing in of any other human characteristic that you could bring to the workplace. I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah.
I intentionally try and go out of that
Be a
realm.
nonconformist.
Yeah.
I actually agree with you, to be honest. I really do. Like I feel like I was like, you just put into words what I was thinking, because like I don't know, I do like the idea that people should be free to express themselves with how they dress and how they act. And I will say though, a lot of times in really almost any work environment you go into, there's usually like a dress code, like that's enacted and just kind of understood. And like they'll either explicitly tell you, like, I work at Target, and so they're like, there's no actual uniform, but you have to wear a red shirt, you have to wear either khakis or blue jeans. And I literally don't own colors except black. So it's really interesting having to go out and buy clothing. And when I talk to other coworkers, everyone else is like, yeah, I don't own red shirts either. Like none of us likes wearing a red shirt, but we all do it because it's like, it's dress code. Or like if you're working in an office setting, it's business casual. So it's kind of understood that that's what's like expected of you. And so we just kind of go into it. But at the same time, I will say, I feel my most involved and my most creative in settings in which I can wear what feels comfortable for me, wear what makes me feel like I'm expressing myself. But I definitely see how number 3 is still a component. So I'm yeah.
Sorry, I muted myself to type there. Any other perspectives, or feel free to put that in the chat too. I feel like number 5 is changing, is the thing with COVID. That expectation around dress and etiquette, if you will, is changed. Like, anymore, do we really care what somebody's wearing behind the camera? Do we really care about necessarily etiquette? What we care about is, like, do you take your camera off when your kids are running around because they don't have clothes on, or your kids like interrupt? Like, I just had a plumber interrupt class and be like, I'm teaching, dude, like I can't answer your question about a roof leak right now. So yeah, it's a challenge. I think we're coming, Casey brings up a good point. I think we're coming out of this expectation that leaders are, say, clean cut, are, I think the biggest thing was what, hair color and tattoos for years. Like, yeah, someone who's like an executive shouldn't have these things, which is bizarre. Mask. So like there's a mask thing like you put, I don't know what these things are. I'm old.
Like for COVID, you have to wear a mask.
Gotcha.
wherever you go. Yeah,
Gotcha.
I kind of love having to wear the mask because normally like when I was working at Amazon as a manager, like you're kind of what Casey is talking about. You have that expectation of looking professional, but like I have several nose piercings, so like I don't have to take them out because I was working at another location and I had to take out my septum piercing, and they're like, yeah, I guess the nostril's okay. And I know when I went to Armenia, a lot of Peace Corps members took out their nose piercings to appear more professional. But now with the mask, you just throw the mask on, no one sees your face, and it's kind of like a blank cover that like you don't have to worry about those things. And so like facial piercings that are normally considered unprofessional are covered, and it kind of gives everyone this like equal footing, which is really sad that a piece of cloth has to do that. But I mean,
it's very sad a pandemic has to do that.
I mean, that's facts.
All right. So, and please, folks, add to the chat as some of these come through, and if you can't, come off of mute from your connection. So, want to move to the independent role, and this is the one I think our leadership diehards, like people who are like, this is what leadership is, and this is what you're supposed to do, and those that have an expectation, well, leaders should just say, here's your job and go do it, is kind of closest to that independent role. So Herman asks, according to followership is similar to vice president or general secretary. You bring up a very good point there. In Bolivia, when we have to participate in an election of the community directive, we present a list of the members of the directive. One is president, followed by vice president, and so on. The week before in my community, we experimented that the president was overthrown by, experienced, I think is what you might imply here, that the president was overthrown by internal fights. And according to regulations, the vice president should assume if the president has any problems, but they did not have a vice president. It was a big mistake because the former was totally lost. Yeah, so some people might assume, well, if you aren't the president of something, then if you're the vice president, you're the secretary, you're the treasurer, you follow behind the president and their directive, which I think is the way a lot of our structures are set up. But I think of many kind of like second in charge where they have their own agenda, like intentionally, right? Like the president is to do this and the vice president is to do that. So they are given a specific directive to accomplish something specific, or a certain area of work. So, you know, I think the vice president role for many countries is changing, right? Like They're not just like, hey, if the president dies or something happens to them, they take over, but it's they have their own agenda or of work. Not saying like they have a hidden agenda. I'm saying their own agenda of what they're supposed to accomplish. So it is a different, I think, perspective of followership. Thank you for bringing that up, Herman, because by the sound of title, you would think, well, they're not the leader. But I think anymore, our expectation of those number twos is that they do have their own leadership role. And Amir shares that in our context, mostly vice president, treasurer are female, and because they don't have a specific executive role. So the opposite in Amir's case, it sounds like, where the number twos are female because they're not like expected to be in number one roles, maybe. They might be like a catch-all. They might take on the responsibility of what a leader can't take themselves, or not necessarily overwhelmed, but not enough hours in the day to take on. So thank you for those perspectives too. A trend, so with the independent role of a follower, and please keep adding to that chat, a trend for followers to act more independently of their leaders than in the past. So as we've become a more educated workforce, a more experienced workforce, as kind of over the past few decades, it's the expectation that you're going to college, right? That's been generally the expectation of anybody that graduates from high school. You're supposed to go to college, you're supposed to get a degree. And I think we're seeing that shift yet again. But we've had more educated and experienced folks in the workforce now than we ever have before. So again, there's that expectation. Then our followers are experienced and capable just as much as some of the leaders in those roles. So that has been the creation of follower substitutes for leadership. So if we don't have a specific leader, followers take the reins, but somehow that doesn't put them in a leadership role, usually I think by title. So actually take the place of specific behaviors previously carried out by hierarchical leaders. So a very interesting concept here. And so there's some examples of this. When employees have extensive training and experience, they can provide their own self-direction and solve work problems on their own without reliance on their formal leaders. So I think we're seeing more of this. And they give like an example here of high stress occupations. Like when you're the pilot, you are leading that plane, but in the overall hierarchical structure of an airline, let's say it's Emirates Air, all right? The leader of that is the CEO, yet the pilot is in charge of that specific project, if you will, that specific directive. Get people from point A to point B and safely and as quickly as possible, right? So they give that example. Another one in here, these employee self-management programs may also develop follower substitutes for leadership. So someone who may not be the CEO, let's say the COO, the Chief Operating Officer, typically a number two, they are, say, for example, a leader substitute. Sometimes I see it within an organization I work with, the COO is the person that everybody goes to when they're trying to get questions answered and say, what are we supposed to do here? Or what suggestions do you have? They don't go to the CEO, they go to the COO because of this person's capability and expertise. Do I think that undermines the CEO? Not necessarily, but do I think the CEO has a few like chips on their shoulder from it? Probably. So these programs encourage followers to set challenging but realistic work goals on their own, to control their work environment, and to self-evaluate and reinforce their own performance. So it feels like they're working in a bubble a little bit there. So when we take that perspective, when there really isn't a leader, or you've been told, hey, like, yeah, you report to this person, but this project's yours, or this area of work is yours, just get it done, right? What are some of the pitfalls of taking initiative? So maybe whether you've been assigned a project, or let's say you have a leader and you've taken initiative, what are some of the pitfalls? Is the reward worth the risk? Are there things that can happen that may not make it worth the reward? So pitfalls of initiative, pitfalls of taking on this work as yourself and not being the leader.
So I have got in trouble many times now working in this job, taking the initiative too much. But I think that derives from me owning two small businesses, that I make those decisions every day, that I don't think twice about having to go and ask somebody if I can do things. So I think they've kind of realized that. But I have got my hand slapped a couple of times, but I don't mean anything by it. I make those decisions constantly, and I try to tell them that that's not in my nature to ask somebody if I can have permission to do things. So now, if it's, I don't know, I think I just kind of read every situation, if trying to think, should I go ask for permission to do this? But most of the time I just do it anyways.
Yeah, and to some degree that says something about the trust.
I think maybe it can be seen as like overstepping boundaries, or like stepping on someone else's toes. Because sometimes, maybe similar, Casey, like if I do something, I don't really want to, like, we're more of a team, like in my organization, so we don't really want to consider like asking permission, but we like to say, like, we let each other know. So at least before I do something, even if it's not like, hey, can I do this, or is this okay, it's like, this is what I'm thinking, what are you thinking? It's more like that. So I think that it's kind of a spin on asking permission. It's more just like cluing everyone in. But it still is challenging, because you feel like, okay, I should just do this. But it's like, yeah, it's like working in a what do we say, community, like a collective setting. And so that's something that I think, as leaders and followers, is important. But it's hard to remember, like, okay, I'm not just doing this alone.
Yeah, Erica, and you mentioned something a couple weeks ago that really resonated with me. You said, if you hire me to do a job, back off. Like, I got it. Like, you tell me to do it, I'm going to get it done. So, and if I have to make those decisions, then I don't feel like I have to ask you, because you told me to do that job.
Yeah, exactly. People are hired to do a job. And I think this is a really, really fine line between followers are, to a degree, expected to fix something if they see something is broken. Like just from the video last week, to say, well, as a good follower, I should be able to help out. I should be able to like fix something when I see something broken. And yet, in some instances with particular leaders, they're like, nope, you should have asked me first. And so that goes to a lack of empowerment by the leader to say, hey, make it work. And if you are second guessing, or hey, you need resources that you don't have access to, or you're questioning the response, or need to work through strategy, let me know. Please come to me. But otherwise, this is your show. You got it. I think it sometimes can fly in the face of trusting followers and trusting somebody to do their job. Other perspectives, pitfalls of taking a challenge as a follower. Is that risk worth the reward? Or other times where not taking the initiative to do something is actually better.
I think we're seeing it a lot in the nonprofit I'm working in right now. Seems to be a fine line of taking advantage of. If you were to, we have this mentality of like the next step is going to get the job done, or like someone will fill in and support. The turnover rate has been outrageous the last 2 or 3 years. So when we lose someone, that job kind of gets split up in amongst a couple people. And yeah, let me see if I can collect my thought around where I was going with this. I just see that if you're willing to jump into that position of taking on the challenge, then the next time you might get leaned on a little more heavily, and asked to do the same thing, if not more. And then it just kind of puts you in a weird position of feeling as though you're getting taken advantage of, especially in the nonprofit world where there's not much wiggle room in compensation or pay.
Right. It's like if I show too much initiative or show too much capability, I'm going to be handed more work that goes unrecognized and unrewarded, which I think is the worst. Where leaders feel threatened, absolutely. So we've got a situation kind of where processes and procedures in a specific business have been set up because they work, are consistently, like, data will show that the way we process this, or the way that we specifically internet orders, the way that we organize works and should not be messed with. Kind of like, don't think about changing something. Don't think about what you think is more efficient. It's this way for a reason. So literally having a leader tell their followers, don't change anything. Follow this prescribed A, B, C, D. And that's the way it works. And that's what's efficient. Don't think about outside of this box. Is, I think, on the opposite end of this whole spectrum here of, oh, well, as a follower, I thought I was supposed to take initiative and thought I was supposed to, solve problems, or at least what I think is a problem, when the leader's like, it's not a problem. Just because you see extra space here, don't think that you have to fill it. There's a reason there's extra space there, without explaining why there's extra space there. So it makes it very difficult. So seeing as we got a minute left, or older generations be willing to take more significant risks, or vice versa? I think if you're like within 2 years of retirement, you're kind of like, you know what, I'm just going to do it. I do think, like, the older you get, you're kind of like, screw this, I'm going to do what I want to do. I have the expertise. You're not going to tell me otherwise. And I think those of us that might be in a younger generation and have accomplished a lot in a short amount of time don't see it the same way. But to each his own, I guess. So great conversation, folks. Thank you for participating today. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm going to be updating the attendance sheet, making sure that I've got everybody accounted for. So please do check that. I'll also follow it up with some emails this week. So thanks for the conversation, folks. I'll see you here next week.
Okay, I had a quick question on one of those surveys.
Sure.
I think it's the one that you put, you posted in the notes today.
Posted in the notes. Oh, yeah, it was in the wrong week, but yeah.
Is that, when we go to score that, is it taking the even number questions or the even number scores and flipping them?
So when you look at, say, item number 2, you're going to flip the score. Item number 4, you're going to flip the score.
Okay.
Yeah.
So all even number questions, or what the, okay.
Yep.
And then I just want to, it feels that if each one is, the total score is 70 for each one, is that correct?
No, the highest score total is 70.
Okay.
So you're going to add up in total, and then there are 3 different newness, complexity, and solubility that have their own score. So when you add all 10 of them, it will go up to 70. So you'll have like 40 out of 70, 56 out of 70, 12 out of 70, whatever. And then you'll have a score for each of the 3.
Got it. Cool. And then the higher the score, the more tolerable you are.
The more tolerance you have. Yep.
Right on. Just want to make sure I got that right.
Sure.
Appreciate it.
No problem. Anytime. Other questions from folks before I cut us all loose? All right, seeing none, I hope you all have a great day. I'll see you back here next week. And all right.